It's St. Louis here. I'm interviewing Stefan Malecek, the author of Crazy Tales of Combat Psychiatry. It's about Vietnam, 1986 to 1969.
No, 68, 69.
68, 69. Going through this, to use a term that was prevalent then, this is heavy. That was my first impression. Then I came back to your title. This is crazy.
Thank
I
you.
mean, you were absolutely not prepared for this.
No one is,
So you had on-the-job training.
pretty much. It's like having children. People say you can't prepare to have a child. You have to learn it as it goes down, and that's kind of what happens.
But you became as crazy as the people you were interviewing.
No, I was perhaps more, perhaps I was crazier, but crazy enough to function and manage my job.
Really. If you could go back, what would you change, Stefan?
Oh my God. Okay, if I could go back and be in the war again?
Yes.
Oh my. Wow, that's a really, I don't
Just
know.
a few, because I have a point to make.
Well, I think part of what I might do was volunteer to get the hell out of Quin Yon a whole lot sooner.
So you're kind of saying it was a mistake going there?
No. You're saying within the context of being in the war, I would say instead of being in a rear area like Quin Yon, where I was for 8.5 months, I would go to the 101st Airborne sooner.
Right.
Because my whole purpose, and because I asked to go to Vietnam. They sent me to Kansas, and I kept saying, no, I want to go to Vietnam. Oh, no, we can't send you, critical MOS. We need you here, blah, 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 blah. So finally I kept putting in requests, and they finally said, okay, you can go. And my point was that because I've always been a writer, and I wanted to. I knew that Stephen Crane and Ernest Hemingway and James Jones, for just examples, came back from the war and became famous writers. And I knew that something changed them. They had seen and done things that were beyond the ordinary, and it had changed them. And I wanted something so badly to change me from being what I considered to be ordinary. And so if I had it to do over again, I would ask to go to like the 101st Airborne. I'd have gone sooner.
More than that, what things would you have done differently? Because there's one
Okay.
part in here where you actually urinate because you thought you were going to be shot by this particular GI.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I was in a very, very serious crisis situation with this guy who had all kinds of loaded weapons, man, and was really freaked out, and thought that I was his platoon doc, and so I had to stay in this place of balance of like watching him and watching his body language and listening to his energy so that I could manage to maneuver it safely enough to get him the care that he needed. Because he was in serious shape. But it's kind of like sometimes your body just eliminates when you're in a situation where you might die, and you need to be able to mobilize all your energy and not putz around with, superficial things.
Having seen the movie Platoon, you really get the feeling drugs were prevalent, and to the extent that the keepers were taking drugs, yourself included. Did that help you get through it, or just?
Yeah, of course.
Can you tell me a little
Sure,
more
of course,
about that?
of course. Okay, see, and the point that doesn't get made is how often and how much lifers drank, how much alcohol consumption there was by the older men, the higher ranks. The alcohol consumption.
What do you mean by lifers?
People who spend 20, 30, 40 years in the service. That's their life. They become lifers. we called them juice heads. There were basically juice heads, and there were the heads and the juice heads. The heads smoked weed, the juice heads did alcohol. And there was enormous alcohol consumption that doesn't get counted by the military. Oh, that's normal. That's boys being boys, whatever it is, They just take that right off the board. But yeah, of course. I dare say that the drugs probably helped me survive the greatest portion of this lifetime. Even though, I'll be 33 years clean Christmas Day, I was a serious drug addict for 23 years. So,
Wow.
Yeah, it's a kind of a dichotomous thing, because on the one hand, saying drugs is such a, too general, but generally speaking, addictions help you to not have to feel your pain and shame, and it seems like even sometimes they actually shift it so that you're no longer feeling it, and one might even be inclined to believe that one was not being troubled anymore by these things, and so in that sense, they are therapeutic in that sense.
I was impressed with the scene with the madam, where she called you every name conceivable and told you to get the hell out of here. And I can't put it any other way. In fact, she used stronger terms than I just did. What was that like in retrospect?
Well, see, and that really came about because I was asking her to help me score some marijuana, which in Taipei, Taiwan at that time, highly illegal. I mean, you could buy heroin, codeine, narcotics of any sort. You go to the local pharmacy and you could buy heroin right over the counter, bang, no problem. But you could not buy, marijuana was severely suppressed because they called it the drug of the Western devils. And they were trying to keep the Western influence out of China as much as possible. And it was it caused a lot of people to be very paranoid. So that was what that was related to.
It was humorous. I don't think it was intended to be humorous. But
I thought it was kind of funny.
Yes, it was. When you were there and trying to play it by ear, on-the-job training, so to speak, did you try anything that wasn't in the book?
Try anything? Psychological techniques?
Yes.
Oh.
I mean, it seemed like a lot of what you did was from the seat of your pants.
Well, and there were patterns. Certain things tended to repeat. And so one part was actually working with guys who were wanting help. Another big part of the job was doing the preliminary psychological evaluation for people who were getting kicked out of the service. And so it actually became such a pattern, almost stereotyped, that we actually Xeroxed, we still use Xeroxes, we Xeroxed off these sheets that said, this blank year-old enlisted man has been in the Army blank months. His parents were divorced, separated at blank age. He had this number of run-ins with civilian law authorities. He has had X amount of Article 15s and X amount of court-martials in his X amount of time in the service. And we just go through and fill in the blanks because it was almost to a man. The people that were having the hardest time were the ones who had the hardest time in civilian life. Mostly came from broken families, had early drug and alcohol and or other run-ins with the law. So we just made this form and just kind of filled it out.
That fellow that says he's only happy when he's killing gooks, is he typical of what you just said?
No, he's a different category.
What category would he be?
Well, there were people I talked. I don't know if you saw the part about the guy Cherokee. There were people who. I mean, I actually knew people the military wouldn't let them go home. They were too far gone. They had been too far out, and were never coming back. And there were people who lived to kill, who loved to kill, who really just. I mean, I knew people, there was nobody around to kill. They'd shoot up a load of watermelons, just because there's that sense of this power flowing through your hands when your hands are on this automatic weapon and this energy's flowing out of you and it's literally destroying anything in your path. It's destroying anything that might have some negative effect on your life. It's actually literally keeping you alive. And there were people who nowadays would be called, you know, psychopathic killers or psychopathic murderers who had really entirely lost touch with any empathy or compassion or sense of humanity, whose whole purpose was to kill. That's the only thing that fed them. It's the only thing that gave them power. It was like their food in some ways. And that guy is one of the ones I would say, you know, he said, the only time I'm happy is when I'm killing gooks, because there was nothing left for him. He had died so much inside.
So do you think, on occasion, some of the officers would send those people out to the most ridiculous situations where they could kind of say to themselves, we're going to get rid of Joe, he's over the hill? Do you think that happened?
I'm sure it happened. I can't recount that for firsthand experience. I do know that this particular guy was a recon guy, and the guys in recon, they really were seriously tight, and they looked out for each other. You know, the opposite is probably more true. When you know, that asshole, blank, that lieutenant, man, he just got 3 of our friends killed, man. Let's take him out, man. You know. The
so-called rats that went in the hole.
Tunnel rats.
Tunnel rats. How would you describe them? They seem like such interesting characters, based on the movie. I would imagine they had to be the most extreme.
I didn't know any of them very well. They kept very much to themselves. They were a very particular breed. Very intense job. I just couldn't imagine doing that. It was real intense.
I can't imagine dropping into a hole that may contain booby traps, snakes, or
all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Or the enemy, right there.
Sure. You bet.
Right. So it would take a certain kind.
Yeah, I didn't know. I met a few, but I never knew any of them very well, so I couldn't really speak to that.
Now, basically, in that war, we were keeping the college kids at home. Is that how you would describe the people you were seeing, non-college students?
Or people who had lost their deferments, yeah, sure. There's a song by the Creedence Clearwater, and they say, you know, I'm not some senator's son, you know, I'm not a fortunate one.
Right.
You know, and you know, anybody who could afford to stay in school, et cetera, or have a deferred employment did so, of course. You know.
So this book actually sends a message, even though when you're reading it, you don't feel that way. But the message is, among other things, war is hell.
Sure.
And certainly this book is full of that. Yeah.
Well, I just tried to portray as clearly as I could my own experience and talk about how crazy it was. It is crazy. It was crazy. What I did was crazy. The whole war was crazy. It was a crazy war, and more so. I mean, for many reasons. Because, for example, the average age of a vet in World War II was 26. The average age of a Vietnam vet was 19. You know, there are a whole lot of. I mean, I've done a lot of comparison, a lot of historical comparisons between World War II vets and Vietnam vets. You know, but there was just all these different. So you got this whole bunch of young guys dropped off in the middle of the jungle, man, with very little supervision, trained basically to do one thing and one thing only, and said, "You're on your own, boys," pretty much. You know, so you get some downtime. You're going to want to do the most radical stuff you can. Drink, smoke, take drugs, do anything you can to take your mind out of it, because you've been. It's kind of like somebody's peeled your skin off and said, "No, you know, go back and be normal again."
How did you feel about that? Not really being prepared for what I mean, even with a college degree in psychiatry at that point.
I didn't have.
No, and you wouldn't have been prepared for this. So how did you feel about your senior officers? Did you ever go back and say, what you have me doing is crazy? I mean, the word just crazy comes up again and again.
No, it's purposeful. Yeah. Okay, so we need to differentiate. Now, there were senior military people, and then there were senior medical officers, different camps. For the most part, most of the medical officers I dealt with were pretty squared away. You know, they were doctors and psychiatrists and like that. They were pretty squared away, and they cut me a lot of slack because they knew I was doing good work. I got commended for doing good work all the time because I did. I was good. And the other side was the senior military people who were total different, breed. Most of whom were there to check the mark on their box so they could get a promotion. A lot of what happened, like, I don't know if you've seen Hamburger Hill, for example. That was 101st Airborne. That was Hill 881 near the Aisha Valley. That was all driven by some lieutenant colonel who wanted to make colonel, basically.
Right.
And the general kept saying, take that hill. They took the hill, and okay, abandon the hill. And they're like, what? And every time they went in, they got slaughtered. But they took the hill 5 damn times before it was finally somebody got enough of a brain to say, okay, that's it, we're done.
And people going out on, quote unquote, reconnaissance, that must have been so traumatic, just thinking I'm going out beyond the perimeter.
Well, we need to differentiate again. There were people who did patrols. Okay, regular infantry guys did patrols. There was a very select crew of people that did recon. It's a totally different job.
Really?
Yeah, the recon people were highly, 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 highly trained. The SEALs, Force Recon and the Marines, the Green Berets, they all had, scuba training, advanced infantry training, medical training. They all cross-trained as medics. They were engineers. They went out in very small groups, 3 to 11 guys. 12 guys was a big recon. 3 guys usually would be a recon team. Often, and they were all jump qualified. They were, scuba qualified. They had the best possible training that there was, and so they did these highly dangerous, highly classified missions. And regular infantry guys, they did patrols and stuff, and usually night patrols, all kinds of different things like that. Yeah, it was probably not. It was not the most welcome thing, let's say.
And did they rotate that, or was it also a form of punishment?
No. Within a company, within a battalion, different companies would take different, like, well, you're gonna go in first, and say Alpha Company, you're gonna take the lead, and Bravo Company will be the block, and Charlie Company is gonna come in from the side, and they would usually that would get rotated. Who took, just like in a platoon, the guys who walk point would usually. Some guys like to walk point. Some guys would walk point all the time. That was their whole gig.
We're going to take a break.
Yeah.
I have to compliment you for what you have in here, because to the best of my knowledge, you can't get it from vets. They just won't talk about it. In fact, I had a personal friend, and when he came back from Vietnam, I used to badger him once in a while, tell me some of the stories of what happened. We'd be in a bar, and he said, "Let me tell you this." He said, "One day, I was out on patrol, and Charlie was right there, right inches away from me, but the weeds separated us. And I froze." He says, "I was so frightened. He could have killed me. I wasn't going to move. And I didn't until he was gone. And nobody else knew that happened. And I didn't tell anybody." He says, "That's how frightened you become."
Absolutely.
It's crazy. He said, it's crazy. So I guess your book is about
Well, you have to
timing.
understand, too, I've been home 46 years. And and this is the 23rd version of this book I've written. So it's taken me a while to where I can talk about certain things.
I can understand that. Well, it's a pleasure being with you, and for our audience, this is the book. It's must reading for someone who wants to know a lot more about what it was like in Vietnam.
Thanks, Ed.
Stefan, it's a pleasure.
Great talking to you.
Same here. I mean that.
Thank you.